How is everyone doing today? Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you angry? Are you mad? Are you really mad? Are you as mad as Wake Forest coach Tom Walter and Florida coach Kevin O'Sullivan were during the NCAA baseball regionals last weekend? The latest examples that when it comes to college sports, whatever the sport, it's a mad, 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 mad world. And Sully and Tom Walter used some bad words that were caught on camera. Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Scarbinsky. This is SCARBO Knows. And first of all, if you are the head baseball coach at the University of Florida, or you are the head baseball coach at Wake Forest University, are you not aware in the year 2025 that if you are anywhere around the ballpark, before the game, during the game, after the game, in the dugout, on the concourse, and you are having a meltdown, someone is going to capture your tirade on video, on audio. Everyone is a reporter nowadays. Everyone has one of these. It takes photos, it takes video. You don't have to be a genius to know how to use it. So if, like Kevin O'Sullivan, you walk out to the ballpark, you're in uniform, and you are informed, you were informed shortly before that your elimination game against East Carolina, process those words first of all, Florida playing an elimination game against East Carolina because they'd already lost to East Carolina in the Conway, South Carolina Regional, and you're informed that the game time is going to be pushed back 1 hour. And this bothers you. The lateness of you being informed of this time change upsets you. And so you choose to berate and belittle and hurl four-letter insults at the NCAA site reps, people from Coastal Carolina, the host institution, apparently, according to the Coastal Carolina coach, who commented on this after their team won the regional, beating not Florida, but East Carolina, which eliminated the Gators in a rather ugly performance. And the Coastal Carolina coach goes off on you, Kevin O'Sullivan, a perennial perennial College World Series coach, national championship coach from 2017, was in the College World Series the last 2 years. And 2 years ago, made it to the championship series, game 3, before the Gators got run by LSU. So you have embarrassed yourself. You've embarrassed your program. You've embarrassed your institution. And it's so bad that your athletics director, Scott Strickland, feels compelled to issue a statement. And we got statements. There were lots of statements last week. Florida put out official statements apologizing for the behavior of Kevin O'Sullivan in Conway, South Carolina at that regional. We're not going to read those. I'm not going to swear that they were written by the men whose names are underneath them. It's sometimes the way college athletics works. But Scott Strickland apologized in a statement. He's the athletic director. Kevin O'Sullivan apologized in a statement for his behavior. And it was nice that they did that. It was almost required that they respond after Sully went mad. Now, did Sully have a reason to be angry? Sure he did. Coaches are creatures of habit. They love routine. They love to do the same things the same way at the same times, especially when you've been doing it as long as Kevin O'Sullivan's been coaching baseball at Florida and doing it as well as he's done. And we might add, he may have done his best coaching job this year with this team, despite all the injuries, to go from 1-11 in the SEC to 15-15. And then win a game in Hoover at the SEC tournament, and then get a number 2 seed in that regional in Conway, South Carolina. Now, the Gators certainly didn't distinguish themselves there. Went 1-2, beat an overmatched Fairfield team, but lost not once, but twice to East Carolina, which we should let people know, finished 6th in the American Athletic Conference regular season, but they won their conference tournament to get into the NCAA. So I can understand why Sully was angry. No excuse for that behavior, no excuse for that language. And so the official statements / apologies were necessary. I don't know if anyone appreciated them, but at least they showed that they understand. Scott Strickland understands, and I think Sully understands as well. This is not how you behave in your official capacity as the head baseball coach of Florida. And I might add, let me just, a little personal aside here. When my older son, Kaiser, was trying to decide several years ago about where he wanted to go to college, and it came down for him to either Florida or Auburn. And we visited both schools. We visited a number of people at both schools. And on our visit, our unofficial visit, Kaiser was he was a high school athlete. He was not quite on the college level, at least not at the SEC level. But we were visiting Florida. We were actually sitting outside of Ben Hill Griffin Stadium talking to Scott Strickland, the athletic director, who I've known for a long time. He used to work in sports information at Auburn way back in the day. So we're sitting and he's talking about Florida, and we're asking him questions about going to school there, about the weather, about living conditions, everything you can imagine that parents and a young man trying to choose a college are interested in. And a car pulls up underneath the stadium. And I have to say, I didn't recognize him at first. It was Kevin O'Sullivan. I didn't recognize him because A, he didn't have a baseball cap on, and B, he was smiling. Two things that I don't think I'd ever seen before in covering him, primarily at the SEC baseball tournament through the years in Hoover. And he couldn't have been nicer. He couldn't have been friendlier. He made a great presentation to my son, my wife, and me about why Florida was a great place to go to school. He actually arranged for us to have a tour of the new Florida baseball facility at the time, Condren Ballpark, the Condren Family Ballpark, I believe it is formerly known as now. It didn't have that name at the time. But we got a behind-the-scenes tour. We got to go through all the facilities. And Sully, again, couldn't have been nicer. So, look, every one of us has moments that we wish we could take back, says things we wish we could take back, and is glad that most of our moments like that, most of our tirades, if they include profanity or not, are not caught on camera. But again, you're an SEC baseball coach. You have to know that if you are at the ballpark, as he was, and however angry you are, if you express that in a fusillade of F-bombs, I think it was someone counted about 15 and 47 seconds, which is impressive even for a college baseball coach. You just can't do it, and you need to apologize for it. And he did. And if that weren't bad enough, then we get to the Knoxville Regional. And Wake Forest is playing Tennessee in a game to decide who will advance to the Super Regionals. And, of course, Tennessee won the national championship last year. And Tennessee has been the poster children. The Vols have been the poster children for bad behavior in baseball. Can we say that? Is that fair? You might even say that if the Savannah Bananas were orange instead of yellow, you might confuse them with the Tennessee Vols. They're very demonstrative. They're very emotional, led by their head coach, Tony Vitello. So during the final game, Game 7 of that regional in Knoxville, Tennessee's playing Wake Forest. Wake Forest had beaten the Vols the day before to force that deciding game. And Andrew Fisher comes to the plate. Now, Andrew Fisher, if you're not a college baseball guy, is as demonstrative as anyone on the Tennessee roster. He's a slugger. Every swing he gets the last ounce out of every swing. He's very emotional. He's very demonstrative. He doesn't hide his emotions under his hat. You know what he's thinking. You know how he's feeling. But he's kind of an emotional leader for that team as well. So he's at the plate. And Tom Walter is the Wake Forest baseball coach. Very successful. They have a very nice program. Got to the College World Series a couple of years ago. So Tom Walter is watching Andrew Fisher get into the box and do his histrionics, doing his little routine. He's trying to pump up the crowd in Knoxville. And apparently this doesn't sit well with Tom Walter. So unbeknownst to him, the camera manages to land on him in the dugout as he's awaiting the first pitch, the next pitch to Andrew Fisher. And Tom Walter uses a description of Andrew Fisher. Well, let's see. There were two words involved in this description. They both started with the letter F. The first was an adjective. The second was a noun. Neither one was complimentary. They were both derogatory. They were profane. They were over the line. And Tom Walter, again, he's in the dugout. He doesn't know the camera's on him. He should be aware of this. Again, he's been doing this long enough. How these guys are not aware of this is beyond me. But he says something really ugly about Andrew Fisher. And in the best response possible, we don't think Andrew Fisher actually heard this or saw this. But he steps into the box and he hits a nuclear bomb over the right field wall. And Tennessee was already leading. This was kind of the dagger, if you will, that sent the Vols on to victory and on to the Super Regionals, where they're going to play Arkansas in Fayetteville this weekend. So it was the best response of all, right? The best revenge is hitting a nuke if you've been insulted. But because it was caught on camera and it generated a lot of discussion, Wake Forest felt compelled to issue statements of its own. The athletic director, John Curry, who ironically used to be the AD at Tennessee, he issued a statement of apology. Tom Walter issued a statement of apology. Twitter was ablaze all weekend and into this week with commentary from people who don't like Kevin O'Sullivan and were ripping him and said, this is what would you expect from him? I don't know that that's fair. Same thing with Tom Walter, people defending him, people attacking him, people defended Sully, people attacked Sully. And it's just made me think, why are we so angry? I understand this is how Kevin O'Sullivan makes his living. It's how Tom Walter makes his living. I understand what it means to be in a dugout when you lose a game. Now, my experience being in a dugout was playing baseball up through high school and then being a youth baseball coach for 5 years at the local community park and then starting a travel ball team and doing that for 5 years. And that's an episode. I could write a book about my travel ball experiences. And look, I was no angel. I never cussed an official from the dugout. I tried not to use four-letter words in front of 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old kids. And I think that's probably a pretty good rule we should all adopt. I did, however, one time, I will tell on myself, I took a copy of the rule book out to discuss a rule that I felt the umpire had gotten wrong, and I tore up the pages of the rule book. I'm still not sure how I didn't get tossed for that. I'm still not sure how I never got tossed. I did get once asked by an official, the home plate umpire, in the first inning when I disagreed with something, and I went to talk to him calmly, as they ask you to do, and he asked me if I wanted to watch the rest of the game from the parking lot, and I did not. So that ended that conversation rather quickly. So again, I'm not pretending I'm an angel. I'm not pretending that I was a role model every second I was in a dugout, in the third base coaching box, meeting with my team, talking to umpires, etc. However, I never said anything vaguely resembling what Tom Walter said about Andrew Fisher, or never went off on a tirade at the ballpark where anybody could hear me the way Kevin O'Sullivan did. So again, why is everybody so angry? And it's not, look, college baseball has become bigger and bigger. It's become must-see TV, especially when you get to the postseason, the regionals, the super regionals this weekend, then the College World Series in Omaha. It has captured people's attention in a way in the last 10 years or so that never had before. The SEC's performance has had a lot to do with that. That has stoked a lot of emotions because SEC people are passionate about their schools and anti-SEC people are passionate about seeing the SEC go down in flames. So when they get a chance to pile on someone like the Florida coach, they will take it in a heartbeat. But one person who chimed in on all of this was a bit of a surprise. given that he was no angel in his personal and professional lives, and we're not going to get into any of that. But Chipper Jones, if you're listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, you know who Chipper Jones is. Chipper Jones was watching what happened in college baseball during the regionals. He's a baseball fan. He's, of course, a Hall of Famer, one of the best players in Atlanta Braves history. I spent a lot of time around Chipper and those Braves teams in the 90s. I was fortunate enough. I covered for the Birmingham News, I covered every Braves playoff game, postseason game from 1991 through 2000. I didn't go on the entire 14-year run with them, but I went on most of it. Got to see 5 World Series, got to see when Francisco Cabrera swung and Sid Bream slid, got to see the first and only World Series that the Braves won during that run in 1995. So I spent a lot of time around that clubhouse, around that team. Chipper was always a great quote. He was always someone you could talk to, get some interesting stuff from. That was pretty much true of the entire team. But Chipper Jones, watching college baseball during the regionals and seeing some of this stuff, some of this extracurricular stuff that went on, felt compelled to go on Twitter and say he's only going to watch a few teams from here on out. And why? Because their coaches respect the game and their opponents and demand the same of their players. And one of the things in his mini screed that Chipper Jones said was he talked about the way players wear their uniforms. Now, I don't know if you watched Georgia play at all this year, and I can't recall the player's name, and it's probably better that I can't. He seemed to not have any buttons on his jersey. I don't know if this made him feel looser with his swing. I don't know if it made him more comfortable, but he was allowed to dress this way. It was, let's be honest, it was sloppy, it was shabby, and it just was not a good look for the Georgia baseball team as a representative of the University of Georgia. And Chipper was commenting on that as well without calling out that young man. So if Chipper Jones is watching this, and he has been, again, in a Major League clubhouse. And if you've ever been in a Major League clubhouse, some of these guys are different personalities behind the scenes than they are in public. If you looked at some of the stuff they had in their lockers, practical joking things, I can't even describe what I saw in Jeff Blauser's locker once, former player for the Braves back in the day. Greg Maddux, the professor of pitching, the PhD of pitching, was as sophomoric in his humor in the clubhouse as anyone. So again, different person behind the scenes on the mound. But for Chipper Jones to notice some of this bad behavior in college baseball and suggest he's not watching some of these teams. Well, he doesn't have to watch Florida anymore. They're out. Or Wake Forest, they're out. Georgia, they're out. One of the 9 SEC teams that were eliminated of the 13 that set a record in getting into the tournament. They also set a record for most teams eliminated in the first weekend with 9, much to the delight of the anti-SEC brigade. Now, we should add about Chipper Jones, he has a couple of children that go to Auburn. Interestingly, he didn't mention Auburn. He mentioned Coastal Carolina. He applauded the Coastal Carolina coach who, after beating East Carolina in the regional final, after East Carolina had eliminated Florida, the Coastal Carolina coach concluded his post-game press conference. Now, again, they're advancing to the Super Regional where they will play Auburn starting Friday. The Coastal Carolina coach said, I have to say one last thing. And he basically went off on Kevin O'Sullivan and Sully's behavior that was caught on camera, caught on tape, the F-bombs, berating the NCAA site reps, berating people from Coastal Carolina, apparently even berating the grounds crew because the game time for the Florida-East Carolina game on Sunday was moved back an hour. So if another coach takes the occasion to call you out, that's really not very good, a good thing to have on your resume either. But the Coastal Carolina coach got Chipper Jones' attention, and so Chipper applauded him, said he'll be watching them. And then he also had to follow up later and say, I do have 2 sons that go to Auburn. Not sure the protocol or the etiquette here, but I'm a big fan of Coastal Carolina. He's also a big fan of Auburn now. So we'll see how that regional turns out. But this is not a new thing. The word sportsmanship, is that still a word? Can you still find that in the dictionary? Is it still a concept that anyone understands or embraces anymore? It seems like, and again, this is not a new concept. In 1989, I'm going to date myself. Back in 1989, as a sports reporter for the Birmingham News, I wrote a huge feature story, a takeout, as we called it back in the days when we used to have newspapers. And the headline of that story was, "Whatever Happened to Sportsmanship?" This was in 1989. And as you can imagine, if you're a seasoned sports fan of any vintage, you understand that back in those days, the principal violator of the concept of sportsmanship was the University of Miami football team, the Canes, the U. They routinely trampled all over the notion of sportsmanship and etiquette and being a good sport, a good loser. They didn't buy into any of that. So that was at the heart of the story. I can remember talking to Vince Dooley, then the Georgia head coach and athletic director, who was aghast and appalled by some of the behavior that he witnessed on college football fields. But you don't have to go back that far. I can remember a couple of years ago when Alabama went to Texas in 2022. Texas was still a member of the Big 12. They had not made the move yet to the SEC. And it was an early September game. It was about 112 degrees in the shade in Austin, Texas. Alabama didn't play very well. Texas didn't play great, but they hung around. It took a Bryce Young drive at the end of the game to put Alabama in field goal range to win the game. Alabama won the game 20-19. And as the game ends, a number of Alabama players did the thing that bothers Texas folks an awful lot. I can't even do it, the horns down. I don't even know. Horns down. Is that it? Horns down. Anyway, as the players are doing this, Nick Saban is starting to jog across the field to talk to Steve Sarkisian, the opposing coach. Knew him well. Sark had been on Saban's staff. Saban had given Sark another chance to coach after he'd run into some personal issues out on the West Coast at USC. And so they were tight. They were close. And Saban is jogging across the field to shake hands with Sarkisian, and he notices his own players doing the horns down gesture. And I wish we had video of that to show you. It's very easily found on YouTube. I should have called that up today. Saban goes nuts. He starts screaming at his own players. Now, Saban going nuts on a football field was not an unusual thing to see. But in this case, what was rare about it was he was going off on his players for their behavior, not their play, but their behavior. And he said, "Don't do that crap." He used another word than crap. And it was caught on camera as well. But Nick Saban, it was nice to see in that moment that he still believed in sportsmanship. He still believed in being a good winner and showing some grace towards your opponent. Yeah, you try to beat each other's brains in for 60 minutes. But when the game ends, show some class. Brendan has a great capture there, Brendan, of the Alabama players as the horn sounds and the horns went down, the Alabama players doing the horns down gesture. And here we can see, here's the video. This is great. Great. Watch Saban's face. It's funny to watch because, again, we've seen Saban turn red as a tomato on any number of occasions on the sideline. We've seen him spank A.J. McCarron when A.J. was a backup and he did something he shouldn't have done in mop-up duty of an Alabama football game. But Nick Saban, in that moment, and I give him credit for this, didn't appreciate that his players were taunting, mocking their opponent that they had just beaten. They had barely beaten. They had barely survived by a single point. But they were celebrating, and they went over the line in that celebration in Nick Saban's mind, and he didn't like it, and he called them out on it in the moment, which I think is key. He did it in the moment, and there's a great screen cap right there, great freeze frame moment of Nick Saban being angry at his own Alabama players. But let's be honest, Nick Saban, you talk about violators of etiquette and grace and sportsmanship. Nick Saban's, he's got to be on the top 10 list in recent history. How many times did you hear a Nick Saban press conference in which he belittled or berated a member of the media? How many times did you watch a Nick Saban press conference in which he dropped rude, crude, profane language? And what made it even worse was a lot of people in this state, in the state of Alabama, would laugh and giggle and think it was funny. Oh, that's just coach being real. And don't be soft. Don't be a snowflake. Why would you get offended by that? I don't know. Maybe because as the highest paid public employee in the state of Alabama, you might have an obligation to set a standard, to live up to a standard. There might be children watching. There might be little kids watching. Is that what we want to teach them? Is that what we want them to hear from the most prominent person, not just the highest paid person in the state, the best known, the most prominent, and probably the most successful? Do we really want to set that example? Is that a concept that's just completely gone with the wind? I hope not. And Nick Saban violated. He still does it. He still does it on College Game Day. He still will drop the occasional four-letter word. And everybody around him, Kirk Herbstreit, Reese Davis, they all giggle. Desmond Howard, they laugh, they giggle, they chortle, they think it's funny. Of course, the standard on College Game Day dropped below the floor when they hired Pat McAfee. But that's another subject for another day. But what if we went back to a day and a time where, as I mentioned earlier, when you're playing the game, you are trying to rip your opponent's throat out legally, within the rules, hopefully, but you understand that it's a game, it's a job. It has a starting time and an ending time, and there's no better illustration of this. I had to go back to my childhood, to my days as a Looney Tunes fanatic. And we all know Bugs Bunny. We all know Wile E. Coyote. We all know the Roadrunner. That's not Wile E. Coyote on your screen, by the way. That is Ralph Wolf. And he is meeting at the time clock with Sam Sheepdog. And they were natural adversaries in this series of cartoons put together by the brilliant, the genius Chuck Jones. Every morning, they would show up at 8 o'clock. You can see it on the time clock. They would punch in. Do you remember time clocks? Did you ever work in a factory when you were in college and load and unload trucks, 18-wheelers? I did. And if you were an hourly worker, you had to punch in a card into a time clock that recorded what time you got there. And then when you left, you punched it again. It said what time you left. And that's how they compiled your hours on how much they paid you at the end of the week. So every morning, Ralph and Sam would show up at the time clock, and they would be as cordial as neighbors. Morning, Ralph. Morning, Sam. And then for the next 8 hours or however long they worked, Ralph Wolf, would spend the day trying to make off with the sheep, to abscond with the sheep, to have his dinner. And while he was doing this, Sam Sheepdog, his job was to protect the sheep. So he would inevitably catch Ralph and pummel him, pound him, beat the dog out of him, or in his case, the wolf. And they would do this all day long, and it would be comical. There would be Acme products involved. There would be explosions, and there might be gunfire, and there would be a lot of mayhem. But at the end of the day, when they were done trying to beat each other, eat each other, embarrass each other, pummel each other, outwit, outsmart each other, they would go back to the time clock. They would get their time card and they would punch in, and they would punch out, I should say. And they would say, "Night, Ralph. Night, Sam. Have a good night. See you tomorrow." Isn't that the way sports should be? You step between the lines and you lay it on the line. You play your guts out. You try to rip your opponent's throat out. Legally, safely, within the rules, within the bounds of reason and decorum, given whatever sport you're playing. But when it's over, it's over. It's a game. It's not life and death. Yes, it's your living. Yes, it affords you, if you're Kevin O'Sullivan at Florida or Tom Walter at Wake Forest, it affords you a great living. Nick Saban, first at Alabama, now with ESPN and College Game Day. So you do have some responsibility, I think, I hope, to set an example, to be a role model. Charles Barkley, kind of a friend, someone I've known for a long, long time, got famous in part off the court because he said he didn't want to be a role model. He said, "I shouldn't raise your children." And he was right about that. But he also understood that the things he did, the things he said, people were going to hear, they were going to see, they were going to judge, and in some cases, they were going to follow. So I will wrap this up by saying, as we get ready for what I hope is a competitive, intense, wild weekend of super regional baseball, I hope we keep it between the lines. I hope we can demonstrate an ability to use the language of words that have more or less than 4 letters. I hope we can remember sportsmanship is still a thing, and sports are better with it than they are without it. All right. That's it for me. I'm Kevin Scarbinsky. This is SCARBO Knows. Call me soft. Call me a snowflake. Just call me. Thank you, Brendan Martin, executive producer extraordinaire. You guys have a great weekend. SCARBO out.